So John will speak for about 20 minutes or so, and then we can open up for questions. So when John's finished, and just kind of, either put your questions in the chat feature below, or the Q&A, kind of interchangeable, or raise your hand and we'll call on you and we'll unmute you. So with that, I think, John, take it away.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. So I'm going to share a brief presentation. Like I said, if you have questions or clarifications about what I'm asking, if you'll put it in the Q&A of the chat, then I'll have one of the co-hosts interrupt me to help me clarify. If you want to wait till later, we'll hopefully leave lots of time for questions from the folks. So what I'm going to try and do now is I'm going to give you a little overview of the environment that this is happening in, and then talk a little bit about community solar and other options for solar. So I'm going to share now. All right. And we're going to begin. Let's see. All right, there we go. That's coming through okay, I hope. So this is move my panel off to the side here. So this is what we're going to cover tonight. I want to talk about what your options for residential solar are in Maine, a little bit around the current landscape that we have here in Maine for solar, and a quick overview of just the solar energy economics and how that's actually something that's fairly real, and then the solar is economic in Maine today. Talk about what community solar is, some of the mechanics and considerations about it, whether community solar is really renewable energy or green energy, and then we're going to have a brief overview of the other solar options for residential rooftop ownership and rooftop solar and fractional ownership, and then questions at the end. So without further ado, they're basically, if you want residential solar, there's currently 3 options in Maine. There's community solar, where there's an energy provider that provides solar energy to you, and it shows up on your bill as a net energy credit. You buy it from the community solar provider, and that offsets the electricity that you use. This is relatively new, and this is what most of tonight's discussion will be about. There's also another version of community solar, which is called fractional ownership, which is where there's a solar project and you actually own a slice of that, and that's how you get the benefits of solar energy. You actually have a direct interest in the project itself and the panels and the project. So, and the last one, which is always a good for point of reference, is what's the difference between that putting solar on the roof? And we'll briefly touch on that as a reference point at the end. So the current landscape in Maine, this state has energy policies in place to help address climate, get greener, and while it continues to have a plan for being able to grow business and be economic during that time. They have goals for 2030 and 2050, which are 45% and 80% reductions from the 1990 levels of greenhouse gases. Those are relatively aggressive. They've recently raised them. Those RPS renewable portfolio standards, where they're going to get their electricity from, on the electricity side of the greenhouse gas emissions piece. They recently changed that in those increases were in 2019, partly able to meet those, mostly to meet the 2050 goal, and for things predominantly around outside of electricity. Electricity is relatively on track, and solar is part of that. Part of what they did when those changes was they allowed for something called net energy billing. Net energy billing is what is making community solar possible. It's also a different program, is partly what made our solar landfill on our landfill here in Cape Elizabeth made that possible as well. And what the idea behind net energy billing is, if you put electrons into the system at one point and you pull them out at another point, they'll count that as the same. Before, you basically had to have it all. Had to have it all at the same point of use. And so, for example, when you have a community solar project, you're going to put energy on at a different spot in the service territory, and you're going to get credit for it where your house is. The key impact of those was it really recently enabled community solar to be a real thing in terms of just as an energy provider rather than a fractional ownership. And as projects are just now beginning to come online, we'll see that in some of the graphs up ahead. So overall, solar energy has actually continued to dramatically get cheaper and cheaper over the last 20 years, and particularly in the last 10 years. You can see on the chart to the left, this is something called levelized cost of energy. And that takes account of all the different types of energy. It includes fuel costs, it includes capital costs, it includes availability. As you know, the sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day, wind doesn't blow 24 hours a day. But this is a way to compare apples to apples for levelized cost of energy. And as you can see here on the left, the levelized cost of energy has dropped 89% in the last 10 years. This is from a recent publication by Lazard, the investment bank. And this is really measuring large-scale solar PV median prices. So not the cheapest, not the highest, it's the middle price of what's been out there in the market. And combined cycle gas turbine has been the predominant energy source for the last 20 years in the US. Wind has added a lot recently. But as you can see, that it's now that green energy is now equal at scale to combined cycle gas turbine is a big deal. There are other complications that solar and wind aren't really base power, but they can now provide economically a large portion of the non-base power that the country may need. So the economics are depend on three factors, depending on, this is for the whole US, but for Maine in particular, or wherever you are, is based on your sun resource, how much sun you get, what's your current cost of electricity you're trying to offset, and what does it cost to build and connect it. And so in Maine, under the current situation, what our costs are, what our sun resource, what it costs to build and connect it, larger scale solar is economic. And part of that is to do with, what incentives, part of that has to do with the drops in costs, but right now it's economic. And so this is something that's real and it's here now enabled by the more recent legislation. So let's look at the growth. Basically, if you look to the far left, you see the yellow in the graph that shows this is where the new generating in America has come from. What's the new capacity? What's the new electricity coming from? And the yellow is the solar. And as you can see, it's really been one of the largest sources for the past 8 years. And in fact, it's been the largest in the last couple of years. You look at where it's growing, is every single segment, utility, residential, non-residential, and other has been growing steadily. If you look at that little yellow strip in the middle graph, that is non-residential solar, and that's where community solar fits. And then if you look at the graph to the far right, you'll see the yellow bars there, depending on if, I don't know if you can see them, but basically community solar has been a big driver in the growth of that non-residential sector. And that's been true in Maine as well. And take a look at Maine. This is annual solar installations in Maine. You can see it's been really picked up in the last few years. And you'll see that non-residential segment also picked up substantially. There's currently about 97 megawatts of solar installed in Maine. That's not that much. Town in Massachusetts, they've got about 40 times that, something like that. But we're expected by the industry association to grow by up to about 1,000 megawatts over that. So that's more than 10x in just the next 5 years. I think the pandemic has slowed that down a bit, and you can see some of that impact in the Q3 numbers at the far in the 2020. I think that's just a pause. I don't think that it's actually changed the economics. It looks more like just a pause. So community solar. What's community solar? So community solar, the way it works is, like I said, you don't put solar on your rooftop. There's a project developer. They sign up subscribers. You build a project. Then the project delivers electricity to the grid. The project developer bills the subscribers for the project. And then he passes on the energy credits to the utility that shows up on your bill as a reduction. So that's basically how it works. And in general, solar that you build large scale, 5 megawatts and up, 10 megawatts and up, couple megawatts and up is substantially cheaper than what you can put on your rooftop. And that's just the amount of scale and the amount of less engineering, the amount of less soft costs go into that is substantial. And so the advantages of this are that you can get this as a subscriber, regardless of whether you're a renter, whether you're an owner, whether you have shade on your property, whether you have things that would prevent you from putting in solar, whether it's an HOA association, whatever the impediment is, you can still do community solar because it's not on your roof. There's no upfront cost. You just sign up. You're not responsible for the construction or the maintenance of it like you would be with your own solar, and you get a fixed savings on the bill. So that basically the model has been that works through the public, the PUC and the public advocate, that they essentially allow you a fixed discount on the energy rate that you pay that's part of your bill. And so you'll see differences in the discounts, but they're ranging 5 to 15% somewhere. Again, there are many providers. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But that's what it is. It's a group project that's somewhere in the service territory where it's optimal, and that's part of the way they do this is because it really lets you put solar where it makes the most sense, where it's most economic, and allows you to share that with the ratepayers, wherever they may be. So let's look at some of the considerations for if you're going to get community solar. How's it look like? What do you need to consider? So basically, there's several providers out there, many of them advertising widely. You select a provider and you provide them with, here's what your electricity usage data is. And so you send them your bill, or they'll get a year or a couple years worth of your usage data you give them permission to get it from the utility, and they'll analyze it and figure out, okay, this is what we expect your annual usage is. And so we're going to take a percentage of that, like 90% or 80%, or you can kind of set it where you want. And this is the amount of kilowatt hours a year that we're going to provide to you as energy credits. And so you have a share of energy credits that you're signing up for on an annual basis. If you're a little over, you'll use it next month. If you're a little under, you'll just pay. So if you're a little under, you'll just count it next month. If you're a little over, you'll just pay the difference in a regular electric price. So if you're billed for $100 electricity at $90 in credits, you just pay the $10, and the other one was already billed as part of your energy subscriber fee. So you get the contract, and the contracts are all going to be a little bit different, and there are some that are going to be the same because there's some regulations about disclosure statements and things that is regulated here in the state of Maine. And there's good information on the website of the Ombudsman of the PUC. They have some information about what to look at, what you should expect. So you can go through the contract, read through the contract, and sign up. And so let's talk about some of the considerations when you're looking at the contracts and evaluating providers. So you're getting a part of a project. So you kind of need to know, when is a project coming online? When is the project coming online? And each one will also have different cancellation terms. Generally, they're compared to other types of solar projects, cancellation terms are relatively modest. What's the time, and is there a cost? And how are you going to estimate your share? That has to do with your electricity data and how they evaluate it, and then what percentage you want to sign up for. And if you know you're going to be having changes in your electricity billing, you may want to adjust that, whether it's going to be up or down. And then what's the energy rate, and what's that discount that you're going to get on the current standard offer rate. The other things that you're going to see in the contract that are required, they're going to, as I said, they're going to want billing access. So they're going to want they're going to want to be able to directly bill you, and also going to have direct access to your bank account to debit that. So just be aware that that's part of what you're signing up for when you do this. This is partly how they package and finance what they're doing. It's really in some ways it's both a cost reducer and credit enhancer for the project manager. So if you've got abilities everyone signed up for direct debit, that's a credit enhancement for your project, as well as you don't have to invest in people who are doing billing and collections. And so again, that allows them to pass on more of this, keep their costs down and keep the returns up for everybody. So those are the main considerations that I've seen when I've been looking at the projects. I see a couple of questions. I'm going to briefly take a look to see what those are. So there's two questions I'll briefly address. Can you more than one provider? There are many providers. I think you can sign up for more than one. I'm not sure. It depends. I'm not sure what. There may be advantages. Again, you're going to contract for a certain set of kilowatt hours. So presumably you could do that for more than one provider, but you're only going to get the net energy.
John,
yep.
One.
You can only do one
provider for one household. You'll be signing a contract for one provider, and it really doesn't make any sense because it's not a lot of their solar farm. It's a very small piece of a solar farm for a house.
Oh, it's tiny. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's tiny.
Yeah. No, only one at a time. And of course, your option is there in the disclosure statements that the MPUC puts out. There's a certain required time in which if they're not going to build for any reason, you can switch over and cancel your contract. At that point, but yeah, one at a time.
So then there was another question about whether you can buy solar power directly, and sort of yes and no. I'll get to that at the very end when we talk about about the green aspects of this. So I'm going to delay that until I get to a little further on in the presentation.
Just for those of you who are not in the room, we're all in our own rooms here. The young man who chimed in was Sam Lippman. He's one of another Energy Committee members who we have on standby, who actually does this stuff for a living. Yeah, it's certainly if there are any questions, the two of these guys will be able to answer. But anyway, that was the voice that you heard from the from the ether. So anyway, good.
So this is okay. This is exactly what I talked about. Is community solar really green? And the answer really is yes and no. It's not quite clear because basically nearly every community solar developer, they don't have to, but from what I've seen, they're keeping the renewable energy credit, which is part of what you create. When you create solar power, you create electricity, and there's a commodity called the renewable energy credit, which is basically, this is energy that was produced from a green or renewable source. And that's part of how the economics are generated in the project. So in general, the people who buy those renewable energy credits are people who have to buy green power by regulation or desire, and those are the purchasers. So in order to meet their renewable portfolio standard, they're buying renewable energy credits. And again, this is to make the market so that you're putting in renewable energy where it's most cost effective, and then allowing the people who need to have it purchase that on the open market. So that's sort of how that so you're not buying green power when you get community solar, but you're catalyzing the solar industry and the community solar industry by playing a role as a subscriber to allow the creation of those renewable energy credits. So without that kind of catalyst, you'd see a slower uptake in solar overall, as you saw the community solar is a significant driver of the non-residential sector. And the non-residential sector, again, in turn, is still a significant sector of the overall solar energy market. So, on the margin, you're making things greener and adopting it faster, but you're not directly getting green energy. If you wanted renewable energy, you could just, and not the discount, you could just pay your regular power bill and then go out on top of that and buy a renewable energy credit. I'm not sure why you do that because you wouldn't get any savings, but you could take the savings and still go out and buy renewable energy credits. And then you would technically have renewable green power. I'm not. I think that's it. So, and then, so briefly to compare to the other options out there for people who are considering solar, there are fractional ownership um, out there. It's a little more complex because you're actually a part owner in some sense, because you have to be, so they're allowed to pass on the tax benefits. And sometimes they'll pass on the, sorry, this should be REC, not SREC, renewable energy credit. We actually, as Sam had Lippman had pointed out to me earlier, we don't actually have solar energy credits in Maine. We just have renewable energy credits. In other markets, they're distinguished, and solar RECs are generally more valuable, but we don't, that's not what we have in Maine. So they're just renewable energy credits, and some of those can pass through. The payback period on fractional ownership is unclear, and it's going to depend on your particular financial situation and what your tax appetite is, and the particulars of that particular project. And exiting those is a little more complicated because it's a little more, you've got a little more skin in the game. So exiting is going to be more complicated. For the community solar we've talked about, where it's just a net energy billing, cancellations are usually, frequently, the ones I've seen are no cost and usually a few day notice or a short notice period. Well, fractional ownership, I've seen a range of things that may be much longer and not entirely. There may be costs involved. But on the other hand, depending on the treatment of the renewable energy credits, it could be fully green power. But there's actually not a lot of providers of this currently in Maine that I'm aware of. There are some, but there's not a lot. And then it's compared to solar on your roof. This is your other option. As I said before, in general, rooftop solar is much more expensive than putting solar in a field on a larger scale. Rooftop solar, and again, this is the information from Energy Sage. In Maine, out-of-pocket costs is around $13,000 to $17,000 for a typical installation. Payback period in terms of when it starts paying for itself is about 9 to 13 years. Your 20-year net savings is $12,000 to $17,000. And again, it can be fully green power depending on what you do with renewable energy credit. My brother in Massachusetts has solar on his roof, and that's part of how he pays for it. And it makes a big impact on being able to put it up on his roof. And then after it's paid for, he may decide to just retire those or continue to sell them into the market. Again, it's your choice. I would say that you'd be a little careful looking at the net energy savings on your roof. What that's telling you is you're going to have $13,000 to $17,000 on average tied up for 10 years before it's going to pay for itself. So depending on what your appetite for tying up capital is, the net savings you get may have a relatively modest IRR. So again, it's not that it's not economic. It is. It pays back. It's a positive payback period. What I would say is, chances are, if you're in Maine, there's something else like insulation or new windows or something else that may have a shorter payback period. This is what I would guess. So that's really it. Really sort of open it up for questions at this point.
John, you see some of the questions that we've got in the Q&A?
I'm going to stop sharing at this point, I think.
Yeah, Bill's is kind of following up and kind of asking if CAPE won't be sort of like kind of suggesting a provider to residents, or kind of what the town's kind of role is. As far as I see it as being on the committee, and we've kind of discussed this internally. Do we want to be necessarily recommending a specific provider over another? And I guess we kind of, at this point, are feeling that it probably just makes sense to put the information out there as much as John's presented it, and let you make up your mind. There are multiple providers out there. We've identified anywhere between 5 and 20. And again, there's lots of speculation out there, I think, in terms of solar developers. They're buying land. There are
many, many more registered. If you look at the PUC in terms of people who are thinking about or want to do projects.
Yeah. So we're not qualified, and nor do we want to be recommending a single one, but we just want to kind of provide this information to help you make your decision.
What I would say is this is where you really want to drill down onto looking at who the principals are, what their track record is, and when their projects are coming online.
Mhm.
Those are the kind of things that I myself will be looking at when I look at a community solar provider.
Yeah. John, if these are the questions or not, but Cameron, I assume Cameron, is asking, how can you tell these guys apart? I mean, you've got these different companies, you're looking at the flyers, their offerings. I think you touched upon this a little bit, but what would you be looking at? What have you looked at to really kind of separate kind of the really great offers from those that like should be thrown in the trash or the recycling bin?
Again, I think a lot of the contract's going to be relatively similar. Again, it's the factors that I was laying out before in terms of if you're looking at a provider, what's their track record? Do they have a track record elsewhere? And if not, what am I relying on for the track record? And do they have projects that are coming online or are online now? And then really it's sort of like what's the cancellation look like? What's the discount rate look like? I'm not sure I can offer a lot more than that.
Yeah. It depends.
Just
It
let me chime in a little bit on this.
Yeah.
The other thing you've got to be aware of, there are a lot of marketing groups out there as well who really don't have projects, but they may have contracts with developers. It becomes very important to understand who they're contracting with and what their contracts look like, and specifically ask them, are you what part of this percentage are you taking that's going to reduce my fee or my ability to save? So as was unlayered by Sam and by John, 5 to 20 or even more, as John mentioned, there's probably another 50, 60 out there marketing. But so I think obviously buyer beware in this case. The good news, however, is that most of the providers and marketers are actually doing real projects, or at least they have projects that are being worked on. So the biggest problem is not really the insincerity of the developer, but some of the developers just won't get to the finish line because there's so many projects out there, and all of them have to pre-sell their projects before they build it. So it's kind of a catch-22 for them. So that's why double so, when John says one of the factors, who are the guys who are going to be early on and let you in earliest savings, those are the guys who also have the best opportunity to build and will provide less risk of you not being able to save anything or getting with a developer who won't be building his project.
Yep. So Sam actually makes an important point about the role of the people who are marketing to you. In fact, that's how I found one of the people I ended up getting a contract from the review. Was I looked at them and I read through the materials, and then I realized, oh, this person is just providing solar from this other person. Let me go look at what they're offering directly. And so I myself wanted to get all the way down to who's developing the project. What is the track record of this project developer? Not necessarily the marketing firm, which is very different.
Yeah. One question that, because it kind of dovetails off of what, there are two Sams, so it's kind of confusing. I'm Sam M. The voice that you hear in the background is Sam L. Anyway, Sam had mentioned that, buyer beware, right? And Gretchen is wondering, all right, what are the risks involved? I mean, is there a cash outlay that you could be on the hook for if whatever reason things don't go well? I mean, and also, to Dave's question also about committing for a fixed period of time. What if you sign the papers and then you're like, oh, in a year or two, whatever reason, you don't want to be involved in that. What are you liable for? Again, what are kind of the risks to signing up with one of these guys?
Are you asking me on that question?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you an answer.
Yeah.
Again, I think John mentioned the idea of termination clauses. That's one thing you have to look out for. Some of the marketing groups are putting in terminations of $275 or more if you terminate early. Others have zero termination. Again, factor: 1, price; 2, time when you're going to get your power or you get your savings; and 3, and just as much important, is what's that termination contract look like. Now, let me separate that a little bit. By rule and law under disclosure, there's certain things that all have to adhere to, all developers. This is really important. If you move within your utility district, you're allowed to take that contract with you. So therefore, you can leave your premises, cancel it at that premises, and go to the new premises and renew that contract immediately. The other thing is if you leave that service territory, so let's say you move from CMP, Central Maine Power, to what is Bangor, what is Versant, they call it now, you're allowed to cancel that contract. And that's an MPUC disclosure rule, not a contract rule by individual developers. So what I'm saying is this: as part of your due diligence, you will want a copy of the contract that the developer is giving you, or the marketer, and you will want, and they are by law have to give you a disclosure statement that explains all the things that I'm explaining to you right now. Once you've read those 2 items thoroughly, you'll have a pretty good idea. You've done your due diligence.
I've seen, yeah, time periods I've seen is 3 days. I've seen, so not a lot.
Cancellation term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've seen cancellation periods that are relatively short and zero cost, which makes sense if I put myself on the other side of the equation. In the aggregate, I'm looking at a bunch of customers. Cancellation is more of an administrative headache than a financial headache.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have some skeptics amongst us.
Remember one thing, John, is that if you wear the other hat, which, by the way, in full disclosure, I'm also on that side of the coin. So this is our kind of labor of love here. You have to understand that these developers are building their farms based on the sales that they make and allocating those sales. So it's a headache, yes. Can they actually get other customers? Yes, but remember, cost of acquisition is also involved. But for the most part, they're saying, look, I want to fill my solar farm up with buyers and be done with it, go on to the next one. So there is that part of it too. There's a risk side of that as well from the developer's point of view.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying I expect your model to say I'm going to get 100 customers. I'm only going to keep 97 or whatever that number is. So that's how they can model what the cancellation cost is. But yeah.
Sam, so you're a solar developer of sorts. I know this is the business in which you operate. Can you put us in the mindset of a solar developer and why they would possibly want to give like a residential customer like you or me 10%, 15% off on their power? So clearly, there's a financial incentive somehow that they have to build this huge facility, somewhere. And giving us a discount actually still makes sense for them to do that. Can you explain what their motivation is and how they're making money doing this?
So then we'll have to, this gets a little, you've asked a question that's going to take a little bit of time. I hope I have enough energy for it.
All right.
So
we have some time.
Let's roll back to what's happened in Maine and why I'm regressing here a little bit. Maine, as John mentioned, 99 megawatts. So that number before the new program was 50 megawatts. So let's talk about just the beginning, or maybe it was 55. And the reason why there was very little produced in the state was because of the low productivity in terms of sun in the state versus, let's say, in the Southwest, Southeast. And also the relatively low energy costs we have in the state. It didn't behoove anyone to build solar farms at that time. Then came along this net energy billing, the NEB you've just heard about. Net energy billing basically gives the solar developer a certain amount per kilowatt for building these farms as an incentive. And so they're allowed to cash in on this incentive. And what they're doing is that incentive, they're giving you that basically an incentive. In the case of residential, it's in kilowatt hours. In case of commercial, it's actually money. And they're giving you a 10% discount, but they're keeping the rest of that incentive for themselves so they can build that farm. So if it's 10% or 15%, that's the incentive, is that 85% they're putting in their pocket to be able to build that farm and make it economically feasible. And I think that's the way I explain that.
Yeah, it's really, it's complicated. I mean, there there's a lot at play here. But I can't say, and I share this idea. It's like, it's kind of almost seems, too good to be true. I'm like, what's the catch? And I guess the question I have is, like, what happens? So this is a function of public policy, right? So we have a new administration that said we want to promote more solar power. This is really important to people in our state, to our other sort of priorities. But in a few years we could have LePage could come back from Florida and decide that he wants to kill this program. Is there like could that happen? I mean, could someone come in and like cancel this, and then all our contracts are eliminated, and we've kind of
absolutely not. Absolutely not. He could do future contracts. He could kill the program, but all these contracts are 20-year deals. Okay, so they are ironclad, and they're guaranteed by the state. There's no way that they can be killed. They're basically utility-clad contracts. Okay, and so no way that they can happen. Nothing can be canceled.
All right, good to know. And John, were you about to say something?
No, I was just going to say, just remind people as well, though the community solar size projects aren't quite as cost effective as the really large scale utility scale ones, but they're still way more cost effective than rooftop solar in terms of what their levelized cost of energy is. And like I said, that's, between that improving and then the policy changes that allow you to sell directly to residential consumers, which are usually your highest cost energy as well, you've got a sort of the makings of a ability to let market forces operate to spur things forward, which is what we're seeing now. And that's why you see those big chunks of community solar growing, because it's not, because of those factors have come together to make it economic. And that's why if it wasn't, your mailbox wouldn't be full.
And it's kind of, we have a question in reference to what CAPE is doing vis-a-vis solar. As I had mentioned in my brief introduction, that the town has contracted for the development of a solar project at the recycling center in that CAP landfill. And just to say a few words about that. So the way that works is that we're leasing that space to a private developer. We did a competitive bid, put it out to all the solar developers in the region. Got a bunch of bids back, and we went with one that can provided the best value for that space. And what it's going to work, the way it's going to work is that for 20 years we'll be leasing that land to that company. We actually have a clause where in 7 years we can kind of figure out if we want to buy the assets ourselves and kind of and take over the ownership. So we can cross that bridge. But basically for the next 20 years, this company will be generating solar power from it, and we've committed to take all that power and apply it to our town's municipal power bills. So it'll cover about 75% of the town's power. So the schools, the town hall, the police department, everything, like 75% of what the town's electricity is used for will effectively be covered by that solar development facility. So It's pretty cool. We didn't invent the model. Again, we just kind of took advantage of the fact that this model exists, and it's basically the town was kind of doing what residential community solar participant would do, especially agree to participate for a 20-year period.
I would add to that, Sam. It's actually to get the best economics. You really have to have a private non-governmental entity involved, because part of that is driven by federal tax incentives.
That's right.
And the town pays no federal taxes. This is common. And so that's part of exactly why you have that 7-year structure, because those tax benefits come over those first 7 years, mostly up front, but all the way through those full 7 years. So to get the full economics, you're involved is basically you have an ownership structure where there's a private party that actually owns it, is able to take advantage of those tax benefits, and then they're able to compensate you for that as a result.
Yeah, it's a very tried and true model.
That wrinkles back into what you're paying for the cost of power and reduces it more so than if you were to just do it yourself and not take advantage of the federal tax benefit that's out there.
Yeah, exactly. So there'll be more. We want to be able to, as members of the Energy Committee, want to be able to make more information about that project available to the public as it as it comes on. So you'll probably see some activity at the landfill, in the months to come. But things are covered in ice and snow at the moment, and also there's the utility is talking with the developer and so forth. So it'll be a little while still. But back to community solar conversation. Question about the time period for the credits, and if they change over time. Gretchen, do you understand that? Maybe you want to repeat that question, or John, does that make sense to you? I guess the question is.
Let me answer that one. I can answer that one.
One of your contracts.
Okay,
Let me answer. It's easy. Okay, so for a residential customer, you'll get a fixed percentage. So the only thing that really changes over time is the value of your bill itself. So if for instance your bill goes down because you're doing 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour this year and you were 9 cents last year, you're still doing 10%. The other part of the question is how many years or what time period. All of these contracts are mandated at 20 years. That's how, and the reason why is well, it's very standard in the industry, but also that's how we amortize our solar farms in terms of over a 20-year period, the useful life of the solar equipment. So that happened to be kind of a perfect storm. Yep. So yes, you have a 20-year contract, and again, whether you have different termination period fees, whether you move, that has to do with individual contracts. But that's the standard contract.
If you want to hang in there for 20 years, you can.
I won't be around.
It's a fixed discount off the standard offer rate of your utility.
We have another question, and by the way, folks, this is great. Your questions are really good, and if you don't have any questions right now, as you're listening to this, but they occur to you later, send an email to the Energy Committee. We're on the Cape Elizabeth, government website. There's a list of the committees. We're on there. So shoot us a note, and we can make sure you get your question answered. A question that we currently have is where can I get a list of companies that are offering community solar? We're kind of wondering the same thing too, because some of us are getting stuff in the mail. And John, you said you were able to find a small handful on the web, but then Sam mentioned there are like 30. So.
MPUC website.
Yeah, there's a giant site.
MPUC.
And again, when you look through that, it's worth noticing what the role of the participant is there, because to be able to offer it in the state, you also register for your role. So you want to see if they're a marketer, if they're a project developer, or what role they play. So the ones who are actually building the projects are the project developers, and they may or may not do the marketing end of it. So they may steer you towards their marketing partner, but those are the ones who are whose track record of having and getting solar projects in the ground, I think, is where the risk may lay, at least for me, the most.
And if someone wanted to support a Maine-based company, that information would be available on that, on that list, I'm guessing.
It
Or
is.
maybe
It's
digging through it.
complicated though, because like I said, one of the companies that I ran across that has Maine in their name. They're based in Maine, but they're the marketing firm for a company that's actually based out of New York. That's who's doing the project here, and that's not unusual. So again, this is an integrated industry. There's people are partnering all across the spectrum, and what you think may be Maine based is it likely has partners all across the Northeast.
Yeah. Is there a reason to go for them? This is a question we just got, but also just came to my mind too. Is there a reason we should necessarily kind of, avoid working with a marketer directly? Is there always an upcharge to, when they're involved versus going directly to the developer? Or does the marketer kind of make it a little easier, a little more user friendly to people? Is there a rule of thumb, about marketer versus the developer itself?
Sam?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. No. And we don't want to give the marketers a bad name. There's some very good marketers. Some of them are national marketers, and they know all the developers and have worked them on a national basis. No, remember one thing: the marketer can't fool you if you've gone and done some due diligence and put one against the other. So I can tell you, and John probably after ad nauseum at this point in his research, a very standard rate, and I'm not giving away anything, is about 10% off the bill. You'll see that with probably a majority, or not more than a majority, of the marketers and developers. And also keep in mind, most of the marketers are not marketing developments that they're not authorized to market. So the developers are also competing. Therefore, they're not going to undercut their own marketers either. So I'm not trying to. I think we've painted a little bit of picture of saying, well, this distribution level that makes a difference. I just wanted people to be aware of that, in any given situation, some squirrely things can happen, and you've got to just be aware of who you're talking to and make sure you know who they represent. I think that's the only thing that I would say there.
I'd also just say in general, marketers are going to have the marketing type skills of communicating, and the project developers are going to have project developer type skills of communicating and building projects. And so they've separated their labor for a reason. And so depends on what kind of info. If you're looking for technical information and things like that, you may be better off trying to get information out of the project developer. If you're really looking for the nuts and bolts of how it's going to work and all the paper flow, and you want the people who are going to be in the customer service front end of that, which may be the marketer or other partner. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's really about the way these operations are put together. They're done through partnerships, and everyone has different skills. And believe me, customer service is a very different skill set than getting a solar field in the ground.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I can imagine that the user experience, would vary dramatically, from one operator to another, and you're like, as a customer of lots of different things, I place a premium, on working with those companies that make my life easier.
Since there are no more questions so far, I just wanted to really reiterate one thing, because I'm really, most of the companies here you'll find, and one of the reasons why it becomes a little bit of a struggle is that everybody's offering the same thing. They're offering energy credits. And so the one thing that I really need to stress is consumer awareness. I'm really pushing this thing hard. This is not a high technical deal. You'll get information that you need on the website. You'll get information in the mail. What the two items that are so important to the consumer is, number one, read your disclosure statement that's the MPUC puts out for every single contract out there. And the second thing, read the contract. That's the most complicated part. That's where the variance can really come in, and that's where you really need to be aware. That's the most important point I can possibly make in this whole deal. Thank you.
So we can answer some of the other questions that are out there. When you sign up for a project and get a disclosure statement, Libby, that will tell you where your solar array that you're participating in or that they're offering to you is. They'll give you, it's located roughly here. They won't give you they may or may not give you an exact location, but they'll kind of tell you where it is and the size of it. There may be some place on the PUC that site that shows who's been permitted and where. I don't know about that. If you're actually just looking to see where they're going in, as opposed to where yours is. But in the disclosure statement, if you're participating in community solar, they'll give you the name, size, and approximate location of the project you're being offered. That's part of the required disclosure statement.
I have a question, a follow up on that. Maybe I just want to, I just curious question for Sam is because I know you go after massive plots of land looking for solar, to develop. Where do you those that are kind of now online? How were those selected? Were they the ones that?
By the way, I'm gonna give you the answer to that, and then I'm going to take the answer to the next question, which is very similar. Okay, this is Libby's question. So we look at a variety of things when we're looking for a solar farm. And at the end of the day, it's about feasibility. So one thing that we look for is obviously cost of land or cost of the lease. The second thing we look for obviously is how level the land is or what the slope is. Up to a certain degree we can build. And the third thing, and in this state, very, very important, is where the wetlands are, where the environmental issues might be, to avoid them completely if we can. And of course, the fourth, and just as important, is how close to the major to these transmission substations, and whether our circuit line that we're on, three-phase power, is where we have to be on, has enough capacity. Those are pretty much all the factors that you look for in a project. And Libby, you were asking about where you can find these farms and where they're built and all that. Well, there's very little there's a lot of disclosure issues in terms of when something comes online, does it come online. You read the newspapers when you see things being cited and approved by towns, but the one Bible is called the interconnection Q, Q-U-E-U-E. Central Maine Power has theirs, and Versant has theirs up north. It shows all the projects that are going for permits, transmission permits in the state. There are over, and this is one of the other issues, of course, not all will be built. There are over 500 projects in CMP territory alone. You'll know by looking at that chart, and I can give you, glad to give you offsite the link to that. By the way, I look at it every day. It tells when the plant has decided, the facility decided to go in for an interconnection study, and when it comes out of that interconnection study. And by that, you can get an idea of when at least it's ready to be built. Other than that, you will not get a lot of information unless you get the information directly from the developer when they're telling you that they're going to be built in a certain time so that you can save money. I hope that answers the question pretty well, but again, I'm glad to give you information offline.
And part of the reason why that's important, right, is that it's interesting to know where your power comes from. I think that's kind of neat. But also you basically want to sign up with a provider that is going to be soonest, to get online, right? So you can begin, earning those credits.
Yeah.
And when looking at the interconnection queue, you can kind of get a sense of, which of those sites are closest to becoming online.
Right. That's exactly. That's the best piece of information you can get, but it isn't foolproof. Okay, because again, there's a lot of companies who go for the studies, but are so far behind that they're not going to build, or they're in a place they're not even in a good spot. They just go for the study anyway. So there are some variations, but those who are at the top of the list who have got interconnection agreements already done, and that will show in that queue, are probably going to build. So you just look at the top ones. In fact, if you look at all 500 something, 50 or so, whatever there are in CMP territory, if you look at the top 10, you'll know which has already probably been built or it might be already being built, okay? So that's a good way of doing it because they are in order. Each study is done in order. Therefore, the first 10 were the first ones to apply maybe a year and a half ago. Others have just barely applied now. So yeah, that's the best chronology I can give.
Yeah. And you don't know that at this point. I mean, if you get something in the mail, they're not going to tell you that the facility is not going to go online for 2 more years or 3 more years or next year. They don't divulge that. We have a minute left. And Laura, you asked for that web address just on that point. We're gonna this is going to be captured. This has been recorded as we speak. It's going to be linked probably on the library website, but certainly on the Energy Committee webpage at capeelizabeth.com, I think. We'll link to it and provide also some resources that we think could be helpful to folks.
Yeah, we're going to be assembling. I think we're going to try and assemble an FAQ and resources page to supplement the presentation that
I think we missed one question. Marianne, is it Marianne there? The answer is no and no.
The question being, are there costs to subscribe? Yeah.
That's
and
number one.
No.
Are the companies financing projects by collecting money from users? No.
So what they're doing, they're collecting commitments and they use those to get third-party financing for the projects.
Right. But they are collecting money from users now they're not. Okay, the answer is no and yes. I'm sorry. let me do that again. Yes. So they're not collecting fees from users. They're collecting monies for selling them solar energy credits. So again, I think that's an important distinction. We better make that distinction before we leave, okay?
Yeah, they're not collecting any money in it. But they don't collect money in advance.
But they're not collecting money in advance. You're right. It's pay per use. Yeah. Good, John. Thank you very much. And 2 bills. One of them comes from the developer to the customer for the amount of net energy credits they purchased, and then the utility gives them a bill minus those credits, and that's what they'll see. I hope I didn't screw that one up. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John, for doing that great presentation. We appreciate it, and you definitely put some great material together for folks. And thanks, Sam, for always being a great source of information on this for us. And thank you, Rachel, for hosting this.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for doing this. And we definitely will have the recording posted probably tomorrow on the library's website. And we'll make sure that it's available on the town's website as well.
Great. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
We're set. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.